Usain Bolt on the right, and then we have a novice sprinter here on the left. And really here on the left, it's more of, just when he's starting off with the sprint. And so he's not in top speed. He doesn't have bad form when he gets into his top speed, but we do want to see, what happens where you end up struggling with getting as much knee height as you needed. And so the big thing is, and obviously I want to say, the athlete here on the left is about 6 foot, maybe 6'1". And I think 6 foot, maybe actually somewhere between 5'11" and 6'1". And then we have Usain Bolt at 6'5". And the point being is you could see how much further back behind him his foot's kind of pushing off the ground, right? In comparison to the rest of the body, where you can see Usain Bolt, who's 6'5", how his foot is really close to his body. And the main thing too has to do with, and this is going to be more with what's going to translate over to getting better knee drive, right? How to get your knees higher up. Because what typically happens when you're not able to get your knees up is, one, your foot is initially pushing off the ground in a position that is just too far back behind the hips, right? So you're allowing that foot to get to, and the reason that'll happen is just because of a lack of range of motion within the foot. So you can see how high Usain Bolt's heel's getting here as he's about to push off, right? And so you want to get to the point where you could really, get great range of motion within the foot, within the toes, to make it so now as you're coming on to, that press off phase, you're able to get all the way up onto the toe. So now when you're pushing off, you're able to push much more upwards, rather than when you struggle with getting the knee drive. What ends up happening is you don't get that heel as high during the push off, so then you end up pushing slightly backwards there, and it just takes a little bit more time for that knee to be able to come through. The next big thing is that as the leg's coming up, there's just not a great spine angle, right? So you can see here, spine's a little bit more leaned over in comparison to being more upright, and that will also cause the knee not to be able to get all the way up into the necessary position that you'd want it to. And then the last thing that I would say is, as you're coming up, just and this again, this is the very beginning here, so it's not as big of a it's not as good of an example, but the last thing would be just getting the heel too far up behind you as you're coming up. And actually John Ross does that, who runs 4.2 in the 40. So he's actually really fast. He just has a really, really fast turnover. He doesn't really have necessarily a great knee drive, can turn the legs over really quickly, and has very strong posterior chain, very strong hamstrings, very strong glutes, very strong calves. And that's why he's able to run as fast as he does, because essentially when you're not getting that knee drive all the way up, you are relying much more on that push off in order to get you going. So that would be the last one. And I see guys that are pretty fast that do get their heels really high up back behind them. And again, they just really work on that turnover, and that ends up being the big thing. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is how to get more distance per step, right? And so what ends up happening when you're struggling with getting more distance per step, or being able to get as much possible range of motion on each one of the steps as possible, is first, just how your foot ends up impacting the ground. So what's critical, and both these guys actually do a pretty good job of this, is when you're critical, when you're hitting the ground, you want to be hitting it coming back, right? So what you want to be able to do in order to pick up more distance is not necessarily get the knee drive, right? A lot of people talk about, if you're not getting as much distance, then you have to get your knees up more. But that's not the case. What ends up being the case is being able to translate, because as your foot comes back and pulling back underneath you, what it's doing is creating a horizontal force into the ground. So it's pulling from, having the foot out in front, pulling back underneath. So that's more of a horizontal force, right? We're going that way. Okay. And then what you have to do is you have to translate that horizontal force into a vertical force as you're pressing up. Right? And so what happens is that if you're struggling with picking up very much distance per step, you're not doing a very good job of translating that horizontal force into a vertical force. So, or you might not even be creating a horizontal force at all. So there's a lot of guys that we'll see that will not be getting this extension with that leg out in front there and pulling back underneath. Okay, so see how he does a great job of getting that foot all the way out, straightening that leg, pulls that leg back underneath. Now that allows him to be able to very, very quickly push right back up and create that vertical force. Now he's going to be, from the horizontal force he initially hit the ground with, and then translating that into the vertical will make it so he's going to be the most efficient on being in the air. So then he's able to pick up more time, more distance, right? So right now he's airborne, right? And so he's picking up a lot of distance because he's able to get very airborne there. Okay. Another reason why you might be struggling with picking up very much distance per step is, again, the posture, being able to keep everything upright, being able to maintain when you're pushing off a spine that is upright. So I'll commonly see people, and even we can see this a little bit here on the left, is when you're hitting the ground, kind of leaning forward a good amount. So now as you're pushing off, you're not getting as vertical. It doesn't do a bad job there, but you can see Usain Bolt does a great job of being very, very vertical on that push off in the posture. And again, that makes it so it's easy for him to be able to get a very strong vertical push. Okay, the last thing is going to be the contact time. So what ends up happening if you are not picking up as much distance per step is you're a lot of times spending too much time on the ground, right? And the reason that is, well, there's a lot of reasons you could be spending too much time on the ground. One could be not having the right type of ankle stability. It could be landing in the wrong position. There's a lot of range of things that would make it so you may end up not having an effective contact time, right? But in order to pick up more distance, what you have to be able to do is you have to be able to land and very efficiently translate, like I talked about, the horizontal force into that vertical force, but that has to just be very, very quick. So once you allow that foot to be on the ground for too long, it gets too far back behind you. And this is where it actually does lead to also a not getting as much knee drive. So when that foot gets too far back behind you before you actually end up pushing off, now you're not going to be able to drive that leg all the way back through, and you won't have the time to be able to get this critical kind of front side mechanics where you get that knee drive all the way up and get that extension is really the big thing, right? And so if you allow that foot to get too far back behind you, before that push off happens, then you won't be able to get to this stage where you're able to then extend that leg and then pull, that stage, right? So you want to get to here and then extend and then pull in order to make it so now you're able to pick up all the distance that you possibly can. So this critical part here is where the Usain Bolt's able to pick up a ton of distance. Yeah, he has super long legs, but he also is so efficient in his frontside mechanics that makes him one of the best sprinters ever. I mean, he's good with his backside mechanics as well. Definitely not bad there. He gets that heel a little bit too high, but his frontside mechanics are flawless, which allows him to pick up so much distance per step and be so fast when his foot hits the ground. So now when his foot hits the ground, he's basically straight. So now he can right away push right back off the ground. Notice he doesn't even get into triple extension with that leg, right? He doesn't need to get into triple extension with the leg because he's so light on his feet. His posture is so good and he's picking up so much distance per step that he doesn't have to rely a lot on being able to push off the ground. He's just trying to cycle his legs, especially once he gets up to his top speed. He's just trying to maintain that cycle at a very, very high level. So, yeah, I give you guys a little bit of understanding of both how to ensure that you're able to get plenty of knee drive, some of the mistakes that may end up impacting your knee drive, and then also go into some of the mistakes that are going to be impacting your ability to pick up the most amount of distance per step, and then how those kind of intertwine and how in some ways they don't intertwine.